It was supposed to be a celebration dinner, just me and my sister. Finally talking again after years of stony silence. She raised her glass, a smile stretching across her face like we were kids again, and said, "To new beginnings." But as she walked out of the restaurant, the security guard approached my table, his face ashen. He leaned in and whispered, "I saw her pour something into your juice. My name is Claire Weston. I'm 38 years old, and my world is one of numbers, of balance sheets and forecasts, where every digit has a purpose and every outcome can be traced back to a logical source. I am, by trade and by nature, a financial specialist. I don't do well with ambiguity, which is why I was sitting in a ridiculously overpriced chair at Luna's table. A restaurant where the lighting is designed to make everyone look forgiving, and the menu is written in a font I can barely read. Trying to find the logic in my sister's sudden desire for reconciliation. The invitation had arrived a week ago, a simple text that glowed with a false sincerity I knew all too well. "Hey Claire, it's been too long. I miss you. Dinner on me. Let's put the past behind us." Melanie's words, even in text form, were coded in the same saccharine sweetness she used to deploy as a child to get the last cookie or our mother's undivided attention. I stared at the message for a full 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the block button. The past wasn't a suitcase you could just leave at the station. For me, the past was a house. Specifically, our mother's apartment, the one she'd left to us both. Equally, in her will, the one Melanie now lived in, thanks to a document with a forged signature and a performance in a lawyer's office that deserved a standing ovation for its sheer, tear-streaked audacity. That was the last time we'd spoken. 3 years ago. I remember the sterile chill of the conference room, the faint smell of paper and stale coffee. I remember looking at my sister across the polished mahogany table, her eyes wide and brimming with counterfeit grief, and feeling not anger, but a profound and hollow emptiness. I saw the lie for what it was, but I didn't have the fight in me, not then. My own grief for our mother was too raw. A gaping wound I couldn't bear to poke with the poison of a legal battle against my only remaining family. So I walked away. I left the city, took a junior analyst position in a new firm, and rebuilt my life one spreadsheet at a time. I hadn't looked back. Until now. So why did I agree? The answer wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a lingering sense of familial duty. It was cold. Professional curiosity. An analyst's need to understand the variables. Melanie never did anything without a motive. Her sudden outreach was a new data point, and I needed to understand its source. She was already there when I arrived, waving from a corner booth with a smile that was too bright, too wide. "Claire, you look amazing," she chirped, standing to give me a brittle air kiss in each cheek hug. She smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. "You too." "Mel," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. I slid into the booth, the plush leather sighing under my weight. She looked polished. Her hair was a shade of blonde I knew wasn't natural. Her nails were immaculate, and her dress was a testament to someone living just beyond their means. But there were faint lines of stress around her eyes that her concealer couldn't quite hide. The dinner, for the first hour, was a masterclass in controlled conversation. Melanie guided us through a minefield of neutral topics, the weather, a popular TV show, the ridiculously small portion sizes of the appetizers. All the while, her smile never wavered, but her eyes were constantly scanning me, assessing. She laughed too loudly at my half-hearted jokes, and she asked too many questions. They started innocently enough, but soon began to circle a very specific topic: my career. "So, this promotion," she began, leaning forward with an intensity that felt predatory. "Interim CFO. That's huge. I saw the article in the Business Chronicle. You must be so proud." "It's a lot of work," I said, taking a deliberate sip of water. "Oh, I'm sure. But the rewards." That article mentioned something about a contract bonus. She tried to make it sound casual, a throwaway line, but her focus was laser-sharp. "Contracts are confidential, Mel." "Of course, Of course, I'm just so happy for you. Seeing you succeed like this, it's everything Mom would have wanted. She invoked our mother's memory like a shield, a tactic as old as our sisterhood. It used to work. Tonight, it just felt cheap. When the waiter came, she ordered for us with a practiced ease. A bottle of the Sauvignon Blanc for my sister, she announced, gesturing to me. And I'll just have a club soda with lime. I'm trying to be good. My internal alarm, the one honed by years of analyzing risk, gave a faint ping. Melanie had never been good. She loved wine. For her to abstain while encouraging me to drink felt strategic, but I said nothing, just nodded at the waiter. I needed to see the whole play before making my move. The wine was crisp and cold. Melanie kept my glass topped up, her own soda barely touched. The conversation continued its slow, circling dance around my finances. She wanted to know about my investments, my portfolio, the security of my position. It felt less like a reunion and more like a deposition. At one point, I excused myself to use the restroom, mostly to escape the suffocating weight of her manufactured interest. The ladies' room was at the back, past a row of decorative ficus trees and mirrored panels. On my way back, I slowed my pace, taking a path that gave me an angled view of our table through a gap in the foliage, and I saw it. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement. Melanie was leaning over the table, her back partially to me. Her right hand, which had been resting on her lap, came up. She glanced around the dining room, a quick, furtive scan. Then, with practiced speed, she uncapped a tiny vial I hadn't seen before and tipped its contents into my wine glass. The liquid was clear. It made no sound. In the next instant, the vial was gone, back in her purse, and she had picked up her menu. Her head bowed as if she were deeply engrossed in the dessert options. The entire sequence couldn't have lasted more than 3 seconds. I stopped breathing. The low hum of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in my ears. For a moment, the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't a simple con to get a loan. This was something else entirely, darker. I stood frozen behind the plant, my mind racing through calculations and possibilities, but none of them added up to an innocent explanation. I forced my legs to move, composing my face into a mask of placid neutrality as I approached the table. She looked up as I sat down, her smile back in place, brighter than ever. It was a terrifyingly perfect performance. "Find everything okay?" she asked sweetly. "Perfectly," I replied, my voice a marvel of calm. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the wine glass. It was indistinguishable from before. The pale gold liquid swirled gently, catching the dim light. It looked beautiful. It looked lethal. Melanie raised her own glass of club soda. "A toast," she said, her voice brimming with a theatrical warmth that made my skin crawl. "To sisters, to finally making it." I met her gaze over the rim of my glass. I saw the glint of anticipation in her eyes, the minute tension in her jaw. She was watching me, waiting. I raised my glass to meet hers. The clink was a sharp, crystalline sound in the charged silence between us. I brought the glass to my lips, the scent of citrus and pear hitting my nose, and I took a sip. Just a small one, just enough to sell the act. The wine hit my tongue, and an immediate, unfamiliar bitterness bloomed at the back of my throat. It was acrid, chemical, a sharp, unpleasant tang that was completely alien to the Sauvignon Blanc I'd been drinking. It was the taste of betrayal. I forced myself to swallow, to keep my expression unchanged, even as every nerve ending screamed at me to spit it out, to flip the table, to scream. But I didn't. I simply lowered my glass, giving a small, appreciative nod. "To making it," I echoed softly. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I feigned a slight headache, pushing the tainted wine away. Melanie didn't press. She had done what she came to do. As we waited for the check, she placed her hand on mine. Her skin was cold. "I'm so glad we did this. Claire," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "I've really missed you." "Me too." "Mel," I lied. When we stood to leave, She wrapped me in a tight, theatrical hug at the entrance. She held on for a moment too long, her breath warm against my ear as she whispered, "You deserve everything that's coming to you, Claire, every last bit of it." It was meant to sound like a blessing. It felt like a threat. She turned and walked out into the cool night air without a backward glance. I stood there for a few seconds, my mind a maelstrom of shock and cold, clarifying anger. I was just about to push through the heavy glass door when a voice at my elbow made me jump. "Ma'am?" I turned. It was one of the restaurant's security guards, a young man with a neatly pressed uniform and wide, worried eyes. He was pale, his expression deeply unsettled. He lowered his voice, leaning in so only I could hear. "Ma'am, I think you should see the footage." The guard's words sliced through the ambient noise of the restaurant, creating a pocket of dead, cold silence around me. Footage, the word echoed in the cavern of my skull. It was one thing to see it myself, to feel the bitter truth on my tongue. It was another thing entirely for it to be captured, to exist outside of my own perception, on a hard drive in a back room. It made it real in a way that was terrifying and, strangely, validating. "Show me," I said. My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. All the training and corporate composure, all the years of maintaining a poker face in high-stakes negotiations, evaporated. In that moment, I was just a woman whose sister had tried to poison her. He nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing. "This way. We have to be quick. The manager. He doesn't like incidents." He led me away from the warm, golden light of the dining room, through a swinging door marked "Staff Only." The transition was instantaneous and jarring. The plush carpet gave way to worn linoleum. The soft music was replaced by the clatter of dishes and the aggressive hiss of a commercial dishwasher. We navigated a narrow corridor that smelled of grease and bleach, a stark, utilitarian underbelly to the restaurant's opulent facade. He stopped in front of an unmarked wooden door and fumbled with a ring of keys, his hand shaking so badly that it took him 3 tries to get the key into the lock. The security office was little more than a closet, cramped and stuffy. The only light came from a bank of 9 CCTV monitors mounted on the wall, their collective bluish glow casting long, dancing shadows. The screens displayed silent, disjointed scenes from around the restaurant, the bustling kitchen, the serene dining room, the empty hostess stand, the shadowy bar, the guard, whose name tag read Marco, squeezed past me to sit in a worn office chair in front of a keyboard. The air was thick with the low hum of electronics. "I shouldn't be doing this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. "It's my job on the line, but what I saw, it wasn't right." He finally looked at me, his young face a mask of earnest concern. "I saw her when you went to the restroom. She was acting shifty, you know." Looking around, I zoomed in on your table. It's a habit. We're supposed to watch for purse snatchers, people trying to dine and dash, not this. His fingers began to click on the keyboard. He selected one of the screens, the one showing the corner booth where we had sat. He typed in a timestamp, his movements now swift and certain. The screen flickered, and the image rewound in a jerky, fast-forward motion. Then he hit play. The scene unfolded in grainy, silent color. There I was, standing up and walking away from the table. There was Melanie, alone. I watched my sister, my own flesh and blood, as she executed the move with the chilling efficiency of a professional. The quick glance around the room, the purse opening on her lap, the small, almost invisible vial appearing in her hand, the way she shielded the action with her body, leaning forward as if to read the menu, the swift, deliberate tilt of her hand over my wine glass, the clear liquid catching the light for a single, damning frame as it dropped into the wine. Then, the vial vanished, and she was just a woman studying a menu. I watched it, and my breath hitched in my chest, my mind. The analytical engine I relied on simply shut down. It was replaced by a white-hot, silent scream. The objective proof, the undeniable, recorded reality of it, was a physical blow. It was worse than seeing it in person. The camera's cold, impartial eye stripped away any possibility of misinterpretation, any hope of a mistake. It was a calculated, malevolent act, performed with a chilling lack of hesitation. I felt myself swaying, and I reached out a hand to brace myself against the wall. The concrete was cold and rough against my palm. Marco spoke, his voice soft. At first, I thought maybe she was fixing her lipstick, or putting in eye drops, you know. But then I saw the liquid. It was too fast, too sneaky. It felt wrong. It's why I came over to you. I couldn't just let you walk out of here not knowing. 1,000 fractured thoughts collided in my head. The forged signature on the apartment deed. A lifetime of small, cutting betrayals. The cloying sweetness of her voice on the phone. You deserve everything that's coming to you. It all coalesced into this one horrifying moment, displayed on a flickering screen in a cramped back room. My voice, when I found it, was thin and brittle. Can I get a copy of that video? Marco's eyes widened in alarm. He shot a nervous glance toward the closed door. No way. I can't do that. The system logs every download, every export. The manager reviews them weekly. He'd fire me on the spot. He'd probably try to have me charged with something. My mind rebooted. Switching from shock to strategy, the analyst took over. I needed evidence. I needed leverage. I needed something that couldn't be erased. Okay, I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. Okay, don't export it. Just play it again. He looked at me, confused, but he complied. He rewound the clip a few seconds and hit play. As Melanie's arm began to move, I held up my phone. What are you doing? He whispered, panicked. Just take a photo, I said, quoting his own nervous advice back at him, before the manager deletes it. His eyes darted from my phone to the screen. An understanding dawned on his face. He gave a short, sharp nod. The video played. I held my phone as steady as I could, but a fine tremor was running through my arm, a seismic shockwave originating from my heart. I tapped the screen, recording a video of the monitor. I captured the whole sequence: my departure, her furtive glances, the vial, the pour, the quick concealment. Then, for good measure, I paused the playback at the exact moment the clear liquid was visible leaving the vial, the single most incriminating frame. I took a high-resolution photo of that. The glare from the overhead light, a small price to pay for such undeniable proof. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to take 3 shots to get one that was clear. Okay, I breathed, lowering my phone. The device felt heavy in my hand, freighted with the weight of this new, terrible knowledge. Thank you, Marco. You may have just saved my life. I just hope I don't lose my job, he said, already typing furiously, closing the playback window and returning the screen to a live feed of the no-empty dining room. I backed out of the tiny office. Delete your search history in the system. If anyone asks, I felt sick and you were showing me the way to the back exit. That's all. He just nodded, his eyes glued to the screen, refusing to look at me again. I found my way back through the maze of service corridors and pushed open the door that led out into the alley behind the restaurant. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to quell the fire that had begun to smolder in my stomach. The single sip of wine, my body was already reacting. A hot, acidic nausea was climbing up my throat. I leaned against the rough brick wall of the building, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The image from the screen was burned onto the back of my eyelids. Melanie's face, smiling, Melanie's hand, pouring poison. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact. What would I even say? By the way, I have you on camera attempting to drug me. The nausea intensified, becoming a powerful, undeniable wave. My stomach clenched violently. I stumbled away from the wall, doubling over at the edge of the curb. My body convulsed, and I threw up onto the dark, wet asphalt. The acrid taste of the wine and the chemical bitterness filled my mouth. I retched again and again, until there was nothing left but dry, painful heaves. I finally straightened up, wiping my mouth with the back of my trembling hand. I felt scoured out, empty and raw. The physical sickness was fading, but in its place, a cold, hard clarity was beginning to set in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a prank. This was calculated. It was malicious. And I knew, with the absolute certainty of a balanced ledger, exactly why she had done it. I stood there in the dark alley, the distant sound of city traffic the only witness to my violation. One thought echoed in my mind, a single, terrifying line item that explained everything. My sister just tried to poison me. For my bonus, the drive home was an exercise in forced autopilot. My hands, still trembling slightly, gripped the steering wheel. My eyes saw the traffic lights, the road signs, the hypnotic sweep of the wipers against a sudden light drizzle. But my mind was elsewhere. It was tumbling backward through time, sifting through the wreckage of my relationship with Melanie, searching for the origin point of the poison she'd slipped into my glass. But the truth was, it had always been there, in one form or another. Growing up, our family was a small solar system, and Melanie was the sun. She was radiant, effervescent, a gravitational force that pulled all attention and affection into her orbit. She had our mother's easy smile and our father's sharp wit. She could charm her way out of any trouble, spinning tales with such wide-eyed conviction that reality itself seemed to bend to her will. I was Pluto, distant, quiet, and easily overlooked. I was the one with the good grades, the neat handwriting, the one who always did her chores without being asked. My parents called me their steady one, their little rock, but there was no excitement in those labels. I was reliable. Melanie was brilliant. She was the golden child. I was the one who worked hard, the one deemed to have less personality. I remember one summer when I was 12. I'd spent the entire month saving my allowance to buy a telescope. I had a star chart and a notebook, ready to map the constellations from my bedroom window. The first night I set it up, Melanie wanted a turn. I hesitated, explaining how delicate the lenses were. She pouted, and 5 minutes later, our mother was at my door. "Claire, be nice. Share with your sister." I reluctantly stepped aside. Less than an hour later, there was a crash. I ran in to find the telescope on its side. The main lens cracked. Melanie was already in tears, weaving a story about how she'd just barely touched it and it had mysteriously toppled over. The blame, somehow, settled on me for not setting it up on a more stable surface. I was the responsible one, so the accident had to be my fault. I didn't get a new telescope. Melanie got a hug. I learned a valuable lesson that night in Melanie's world. The truth was never as important as the story she told. That dynamic never changed. It just festered, the stakes growing higher with each passing year. The ultimate betrayal, the one that had finally fractured our relationship beyond repair, came cloaked in the scent of funeral lilies. When our mother died, the grief was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The will was simple, a reflection of our mother's fairness. Everything was to be split 50-50. That included her small but well-kept apartment, a place filled with 30 years of memories. It was the only real home I'd ever known. 2 weeks after the funeral, Melanie called a meeting with the estate lawyer. She arrived looking like the perfect grieving daughter. Dressed in black, her eyes redrimmed, she produced a document, a supposed addendum to the will, signed by our mother just a month before her death. It gifted the entire apartment to Melanie, citing her greater need. I knew, instantly, that it was a lie. I knew my mother's signature better than my own. The loop on the L was too perfect, the slant too deliberate. My mother's hand, weakened by her illness, had been shaky and frail. This was the confident, arrogant script of my sister, but I had no proof, only a gut-deep certainty. Melanie cried, claiming she had no idea, that it was Mom's secret final wish. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, but said the document appeared legitimate. To fight it would have meant a lawsuit. It would have meant lawyers and depositions, and dragging our mother's memory through a bitter, public battle. It would have meant facing Melanie's masterful performances in court. And I was tired. The grief had hollowed me out, leaving no reserves for a war. So I conceded. I let her have it. I packed 2 suitcases, left the city, and started over. It wasn't surrender, it was survival. I cut out the cancer to save myself. For 3 years, there was silence. I built a new life, a new career. I poured all the diligence and focus that had once made me the boring sister into my work. I found a quiet satisfaction in the logic of numbers, in the clear-cut success of a well-executed financial strategy. I didn't hear from Melanie, but I heard of her. A mutual friend mentioned, about 2 years ago, that Melanie's grand foray into real estate investment had imploded. She'd bought into a luxury condo development that went bankrupt. She'd lost everything. The news barely registered with me at the time. It was just another chapter in a book I had already closed. Then, a month ago, everything changed for me. My company underwent a major restructuring. The CFO was ousted, and in a move that surprised everyone, including myself, the board appointed me as the interim replacement. It was a huge leap, a vote of confidence that validated every long night and sacrificed weekend. The local Business Chronicle ran a small feature on the shakeup. It was a standard corporate piece, but it included one line that, I now realize, was like a flare fired into the night, catching the eye of a predator. Tucked into a paragraph about my compensation package was the sentence, "Sources inside the firm project that Weston's contract includes a performance bonus that could be as high as $850,000. I read the article and felt a surge of pride. The very next day, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I no longer had saved, but knew by heart. "Hey Claire, it's been too long. I miss you." The timing was no coincidence. I knew that then, but I had misinterpreted the motive. I thought it was simple, pathetic jealousy. I assumed she would ask for a loan, that this whole dinner was a prelude to a tearful, manipulative performance designed to get her hands on my money. It was insulting, but it was a familiar kind of insult. I had prepared myself to say no. I was a fool. This wasn't a clumsy cash grab. This was a plan, a cold, vicious, and terrifyingly logical plan from her point of view. She didn't just want a piece of my success. She wanted to take me off the board entirely. The sedative, the alcohol. She wasn't trying to kill me. That would be too messy, too direct. She was trying to incapacitate me, to make me crash my car on the way home, to have me found incoherent in a public place, to create a scandal that would make the board question their choice, to have the interim title revoked and the bonus contract voided. She wasn't just after my money. She was after my life, the one I had painstakingly built from the ashes of the one she'd helped burn down. Melanie had always operated under a strange, warped philosophy. She genuinely believed that there was a finite amount of luck in the world, and that I had somehow taken her share. My successes were not my own. They were a debt I owed her. In her mind, I had borrowed Mom's luck. She could never admit that her failures were the result of her own poor choices, her arrogance, her laziness. It was easier to believe that I had stolen something from her. It was the story she told herself, the one that justified every backstabbing comment, every casual betrayal, and, ultimately, the vial of poison. As I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine, the car fell silent. The anger, which had been a hot, nauseating burn, was now cooling, hardening into something else, something cold, dense, and absolute, resolve. For years, I had survived Melanie by absorbing the blows, by enduring her betrayals, and then walking away. I endured the cracked telescope, the stolen apartment, the constant, draining emotional manipulation. My greatest skill had been my ability to suffer in silence. Not anymore. This time, she wouldn't be met with silence and a quiet retreat. She would be met with the full, unyielding force of the world I now inhabited, a world of compliance, of audits, of brutal, unforgiving facts. She thought she was playing the same old game, but she didn't realize that I was no longer the same player. I wouldn't fight her with tears or accusations. I would fight her with data, with evidence, with the law. She had always believed I was the one who was boring, predictable, without imagination. She was about to find out just how creative a financial specialist can be when her own life is the asset she's protecting. This time, I wasn't just going to endure. I was going to make her endure the truth. I didn't go home. The logical part of my brain, the part that had taken over during the drive, calculated the risks. What if the substance was more potent than I realized? What if the effects were delayed? The single small sip I'd taken had already caused a violent physical reaction. Leaving it to chance was not an option. My car, a vessel for my churning thoughts and a body that felt increasingly alien, bypassed my quiet suburban street and headed for the city, towards the sterile, unforgiving lights of St. Jude's emergency room. The ER waiting room was a unique circle of hell, a fluorescent-lit purgatory filled with the quiet suffering of strangers. The air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and anxiety. I checked myself in, my voice unnaturally steady as I gave the triage nurse a carefully edited version of events. A business dinner. I had one sip of wine and had a severe reaction, nausea, vomiting, and now I'm feeling dizzy and disoriented. I omitted the part about my sister. For now, this wasn't a police matter, it was a data collection exercise. They took me back to a cubicle separated from the next by a thin, pale green curtain. The dizziness was worse now. A low-grade vertigo that made the room feel like it was gently rocking. A doctor, a young man with tired eyes and a kind face, listened patiently as I repeated my story. He nodded, his expression unreadable. It could be a sudden allergy, or a bad bottle of wine, though that's rare. We'll run some blood work, get you on an IV for hydration, and see how you feel. As a nurse efficiently drew vials of blood from my arm, my mind was working. This was hospital protocol, standard procedure. The tests they would run would be for common allergens, liver function, blood alcohol content. They weren't looking for a targeted, malicious substance. I needed my own data, untainted by hospital bureaucracy or standard assumptions. "Nurse," I said, my voice clear despite the fuzziness in my head, "I need you to draw an extra vial, 2, to be safe, and I need them sealed and labeled for an independent lab." She paused, looking from the needle in my arm to my face. "That's a very unusual request. Ma'am, is there a reason?" "I work in corporate compliance," I said, the lie coming easily. "We've had issues with product tampering at company events. This dinner was with a competitor. It's my protocol to verify. I'll sign whatever waivers you need." It was a plausible enough story in this city. Her skepticism softened into understanding. She nodded, drew 2 more vials of deep red blood, carefully sealed them with evidence tape, and labeled them with my name and the time of the draw. She placed them in a biohazard bag and handed them to me. Holding the bag, the warmth of my own blood a strange and unnerving sensation through the plastic, felt like my first concrete move. This was evidence. This was an asset. They hooked me up to an IV drip, and the cool saline solution entering my veins was a small comfort. The doctor returned an hour later with a printout. "Well, Ms. Weston, your preliminary results are a little confusing. Your blood alcohol is negligible, what we'd expect from a single sip of wine. But your other markers, they suggest the possible ingestion of sedatives mixed with alcohol. It's presenting a bit like a data rape drug, but not a typical one. Have you taken any prescription sleep aids or anxiety medication recently?" "No," I said, my voice flat. The words on the page confirmed the bitter taste in my mouth, the cold dread in my heart, possible ingestion of sedatives. I had my baseline. Now it was time to test the other variable. Lying in the sterile bed, the rhythmic beep of a nearby monitor the only sound. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The tremor was gone, replaced by an icy calm. I found Melanie's number and pressed call. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice a perfect symphony of feigned, sleepy concern. "Claire." "Oh my God. Is everything okay? It's so late." "I'm in the hospital." "Mel," I said, keeping my tone neutral, observational. A sharp theatrical gasp on the other end. "What why? What happened? Was it the drive home? Are you hurt?" The questions came in a rapid-fire burst. each one a carefully crafted performance of sisterly love. I got sick right after you left. Severe nausea, dizziness. Oh, my God. Claire, I'm so sorry. It must have been the wine. I had no idea you were allergic to Sauvignon Blanc. You should have said something. I feel terrible. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. An allergy, a simple, plausible, untraceable explanation that painted her as nothing but a caring, if slightly forgetful, sister. I let her finish, let the silence stretch for a beat. Then I deployed my own data point. No. Mel, I said, my voice dropping, losing all its warmth. I'm not allergic to wine, but I do know that Luna's table has excellent security cameras. The silence that followed was more damning than any confession. It was vast and absolute. I could hear the void where her excuses and lies should have been. I could almost picture her on the other end, her face falling, the mask of concern dissolving to reveal the cold panic underneath. For 3 full seconds, there was nothing but the faint electronic hiss of the open line. Then, a sharp click. She had hung up. I stared at my phone. That silence was my confirmation. It was her admission of guilt, as clear and irrefutable as the video itself. My next move was insurance. I scrolled through my contacts to David Chen, Esquire. David was a sharp, discreet lawyer I'd worked with at my old firm before I'd moved. He was tenacious, loyal, and more importantly, he knew how I operated. I sent him a new message. Attached were the video file and the still photo I had taken from the security monitor. The text was brief and direct. David, need you to hold this for me, time-stamped and secure. If you don't hear from me in 48 hours, or if anything happens to me, you send this file directly to the lead detective in the Homicide and Assault Division. No questions. His reply came back in less than a minute. File received and secured. Claire, hope you're okay. I typed back, I will be. It was done. The evidence was preserved, duplicated, and a failsafe was in place. Now, I just needed the final piece of my puzzle. I was discharged from the hospital a few hours later with a diagnosis of adverse reaction to an unknown substance and instructions to follow up with my primary care physician. The first thing I did the next morning, before even going home, was drive the sealed bag containing my blood to a private, high-end toxicology lab I'd used before for sensitive corporate cases. I paid for the most comprehensive panel in a rush order. The results arrived in my secure email inbox 36 hours later, a sterile PDF document that held the final, absolute truth. The lab had found 2 primary substances that didn't belong in my system: ethanol, consistent with the single sip of wine, and trace amounts of zolpidem. I stared at the name, zolpidem. I knew it. It was the generic name for Ambien, a common, powerful, prescription-only sleeping pill. And in that moment, the full, ugly scope of her plan became terrifyingly clear. She wasn't trying to kill me. Murder was crude, messy, and left a trail. Melanie was more subtle than that. Zolpidem mixed with alcohol was a potent combination, known to cause profound drowsiness, confusion, blackouts, and impaired motor skills. It was a recipe for a disaster that would look entirely self-inflicted: a car accident on the way home, where I would be found at fault, a bottle of wine on the restaurant bill as a convenient explanation, or a public collapse, a humiliating scene that would paint the new interim CFO as unstable, a drunk, a liability. The board would be spooked, the promotion would be rescinded, the $850,000 bonus would vanish. She wasn't trying to end my life. She was trying to end my career, to shatter the life I had built without her. She wanted to ruin me and make it look like I had ruined myself. A slow, cold fury solidified in my chest. It was a meticulously planned attack on my reputation, my livelihood. But she had made a critical miscalculation. She had forgotten what I do for a living. I am a specialist in financial compliance. My entire career is built on a foundation of rules, of evidence, of documentation. I live in a world where every transaction leaves a trail, where every claim must be substantiated, where the fine print can make or break a billion-dollar deal. She had tried to poison me, but she had no idea that I saved everything, every email, every text, every contract, every casual word, and now I had every piece of this, too, the video, the photo, the hospital report, and now a lab-certified toxicology result. She had brought her petty, emotional brand of treachery into my arena, an arena governed by facts, not feelings, and she was about to learn a very hard lesson in compliance. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind something far more dangerous: clarity. In the world of high-stakes finance, emotion is a liability. Panic leads to bad trades. Anger leads to foolish risks. For 2 days, I treated the attempt on my life not as a personal trauma, but as a hostile takeover bid. Melanie had tried to devalue my primary asset, my reputation and career, in order to acquire a share of my future earnings. It was an ill-conceived, poorly executed attack, and now I was preparing my response. A corporate strategist does not scream and shout. They leverage the opponent's weaknesses and dismantle them piece by piece, using the rules of the system. I knew Melanie's primary weakness because it was the same as her primary strength, her network. She was a freelance PR consultant, a professional charmer who thrived on knowing people, on trading in whispers and information. Her client list was a revolving door of mid-level companies, and I knew for a fact, through years of passive observation, that she wasn't above using information gleaned from one client to curry favor with another. She called it networking. I called it a catastrophic security breach waiting to happen. Her biggest client, the one that kept her afloat after her real estate disaster, was Sterling Thorne, our company's most aggressive and bitter rival. This was my entry point. The plan formed in my mind with the clean, cold logic of a flowchart. It was a compliance trap, and I was about to bait it with the one thing Melanie could never resist: the illusion of easy money and insider access. I waited until Tuesday morning, a full 5 days after the dinner, enough time for her panic to have subsided, replaced by a nervous uncertainty. When I called her, I pitched my voice to a frequency of cheerful, slightly naive forgiveness. I was Claire, the little sister, not Claire Weston, the interim CFO. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with caution. "Hello?" "Mel." "Hi, it's me," I said, infusing my tone with a manufactured brightness. "Claire, I was so worried. When you hung up, I didn't know what to think." The lie was immediate, reflexive. "Oh, sorry, my phone died." I breezed past the excuse. "Listen, it was just the weirdest thing. The doctors think I had some bizarre, on in a million allergic reaction. I'm totally fine now." "Crazy, right?" I gave a little laugh, a sound I had practiced in the car on the way to the office. It sounded convincingly carefree. The relief on her end of the line was a palpable thing. I could almost hear the tension leaving her shoulders. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "I felt so awful. I was going to call, but I was afraid you were angry with me for picking that wine." "Don't be silly," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Anyway, that's not why I'm calling. Something's come up at work, and I immediately thought of you." This was the bait. Her interest piqued. Her voice sharpened. "Oh, what is it?" "Well, as part of this whole interim CFO mess, I'm in charge of reviewing all our external consultancy contracts. Our current PR firm is lackluster and expensive. I'm putting together a shortlist for a few new freelance projects, big ones, for our Q1 product launch. It's high-profile stuff. I know how good you are, Mel, and I thought, who better to trust than my own sister?" The silence this time was one of pure, unadulterated greed. I had offered her a seat at the table she had just tried to flip over. I was dangling the very prize she had attempted to ruin me for. "Claire, I don't know what to say," she stammered. "That's amazing." "It's just a proposal for now," I said, managing the hook. "But if you're interested, I can send over the preliminary project file. The only thing is, because of how sensitive the launch data is, our legal department is being a real pain. You'd have to sign a ridiculously strict NDA before I can even show you the brief." "Of course, anything. Send it over," she said. her voice electric with excitement. She believed it. She believed I was the same forgiving, naive little sister she'd always been able to manipulate. She thought she was getting away with it, and getting a reward on top. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 began the moment I hung up. I didn't use my company's standard NDA. Instead, I spent 2 hours on the phone with David, my personal lawyer, crafting a new one. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of legal misdirection. It contained all the standard clauses about confidentiality and non-competition, but buried deep in Section 7, subsection D, under the heading Data Security Protocols, was a single, bespoke sentence. The consultant agrees that all digital materials related to this project are proprietary and subject to periodic, unannounced security audits by the company or a designated third-party cybersecurity firm to ensure compliance and prevent unauthorized dissemination. It was perfect. By signing it, she would be giving my company explicit permission to monitor her handling of our data. She would never read it. No one ever reads the fine print. I emailed her the NDA. She signed it digitally and sent it back in less than 10 minutes. Now for Phase 3, the honeypot. I created a new folder on a secure cloud server, the kind my company uses for sensitive M&A deals. I named it Project Nightingale Q1 Launch Brief. Inside, I placed a series of documents I'd created myself. They looked official, filled with convincing but entirely fabricated product specs, marketing strategies, and budget projections that would be absolute gold to a competitor like Sterling Thorne. And I embedded the master file, a PowerPoint presentation titled Nightingale Executive Summary, with a tracking script. It was a sophisticated piece of software, normally used to track shareholder access to earnings reports. It would log every time the file was opened, the IP address of the device opening it, the geographic location of that IP, and how long the file was viewed. I sent her a link to the secure folder. Here it is. My email read, "Take a look. Let's talk next week." Then, I waited and I watched. The first notification came 12 minutes later. File Executive Summary, PPTX, accessed. IP address 73.15, GASX. Location San Francisco, CA. Duration 28 minutes. That was her home IP address. She was reading it, taking the bait. For the rest of the day, there was nothing. I worked, attended my meetings, analyzed spreadsheets, the calm exterior of the interim CFO perfectly intact, but a small window on my second monitor remained open, displaying the live access log. It was a digital vigil. The second notification came the next morning at 10:17 a.m., my heart hammered in my chest. A cold, clinical thrill. File Executive Summary, PPTX, accessed. IP address 2R4.88 XXX XXX. Location San Francisco. CA. Duration 43 minutes. I didn't recognize the IP. I ran a trace. The result came back, and I smiled. The IP address was registered to a corporate network. The owner of that network was Sterling Thorne. She'd done it. The fool. The arrogant, greedy fool. She couldn't help herself. She had taken my fake confidential data and, less than 24 hours after signing a document forbidding her from doing so, had walked it directly into the headquarters of our biggest competitor. She was likely in their conference room right now, presenting it as a sign of her value, proof that she could be their inside source. I spent the next hour meticulously documenting everything. I took time-stamped screenshots of the access logs. I ran multiple traces on the second IP address. Saving the results, I compiled a single, password-protected PDF, the introductory email chain, the executed NDA with her digital signature, and the complete, irrefutable access log showing the data being opened from within a competitor's network. The following morning, day 3, I attached that PDF to a new email. The recipients were two people, Catherine Brandt, the head of our corporate legal department, and Michael Shaw, our ex-NSA head of corporate security. The subject line was simple, urgent, potential breach of corporate security and NDA violation. The body of the email was cold, professional, and devoid of any personal connection. Catherine, Michael. Please see the attached file. It details a potential security breach related to a prospective consultant, Melanie Landon. Per the executed NDA enclosed, she was granted access to sensitive preliminary materials for Project Nightingale. Our security logs show these materials were subsequently accessed from an IP address registered to the corporate network of Sterling Thorne. As this involves a direct competitor and a potential violation of corporate espionage statutes, I am escalating this to you for immediate investigation and action. Regards. Claire Weston, Interim Chief Financial Officer. I hit send. There was no mention of our relationship, no hint of the poisoning, no emotion. I didn't have to. I had created a self-contained, perfect corporate crime. Melanie Landon, prospective consultant, had violated a legally binding contract and committed an act of corporate espionage against my company. I leaned back in my chair. I didn't need to touch her. I didn't need to confront her or accuse her. I had simply created the conditions for her own self-destruction and then stepped back to watch. The formidable, merciless machine of corporate law would do the rest. Melanie had just signed her name to a trap designed to look like an opportunity, and the jaws were now snapping shut. The email sat in my sent folder, a single line item signifying the launch of a missile. I knew the process at my company intimately. The email would trigger an immediate, automated flag in the system. Legal and security would convene a preliminary meeting within the hour. By noon, Melanie's name would be on a priority watch list. By the end of the day, they would have already started building their case. The machine was now running on its own, and it was relentless. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hyper-focused calm. I led a budget review meeting, dissected quarterly earnings reports, and debated the merits of a new capital expenditure. On the surface, I was the picture of a competent executive, but beneath that surface, a part of my mind was a coiled spring, waiting. I knew the call would come. It was only a matter of when. It came the next morning. Just after 10, I was at my desk, a sweeping piece of dark wood on the 42nd floor, with a panoramic view of the city I had once fled. My phone screen lit up with her name. I let it ring twice, a small assertion of control, before picking it up and putting it on speaker. Claire Weston. My voice was cool, professional. What did you do? The voice on the other end was a ragged, high-pitched shriek, stripped of all its practiced charm. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of panic. I swiveled my chair to look out the window, at the endless expanse of glass and steel. Good morning, Melanie. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't you play games with me, she screeched, her voice cracking. I just got a letter. From a lawyer. Brandt, from your company. They're talking about an injunction, a legal hold. What the hell did you do with that contract? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. It was black and bitter. The contract. You mean the non-disclosure agreement you signed? I didn't do anything with it. Mel, I just filed it. Per standard procedure. I kept my tone level, a placid lake of calm against her hurricane of terror. They're accusing me of sharing proprietary information, corporate espionage. They said they have logs, IP addresses. Claire, this is insane. Is it? I asked softly. You know, you really should have had a lawyer look at that document before you signed it. Section 7, in particular, it's always wise to read the fine print. There was a choked sound on the other end, a gasp of dawning, horrified comprehension. She was finally realizing that the trap was not the accusation, but the permission she herself had granted. You set me up, she whispered, the hysteria giving way to a venomous, trembling rage. This was all a setup, the job, the file, all of it. You're trying to ruin my life. Her accusation hung in the air between us, a raw, ugly thing. For a moment, a flicker of the old me, the younger sister who always absorbed the blame, wanted to flinch, but that version of me was gone, purged in the alley behind Luna's table. I leaned forward, my voice dropping but losing none of its sharp, icy edge. Ruin your life. I repeated the words slowly, letting her hear the absurdity in them. No, Melanie, I'm not doing anything to you. I'm merely reflecting your own actions back at you. It's a concept from finance called mirroring. You establish a position, and the market reflects its true value. You poured poison into my drink to sabotage my career. I presented you with a contract, and you used it to commit corporate espionage. Every action has a consequence. You're just finally seeing the bill for yours. I could hear her ragged breathing, the sharp, shallow intakes of air of someone hyperventilating. You can't prove that the dinner, that was just a misunderstanding, an allergy. She was scrambling, falling back on her old, flimsy narratives. Was it? I asked. I minimized the spreadsheet on my screen and opened my secure cloud folder. I found the video file from the restaurant security camera. With a few clicks, I attached it to a new text message addressed to her. My fingers were perfectly steady as I typed a single, cold sentence beneath it. This file is stored safely in a cloud archive, right alongside a copy of the NDA you signed. Timestamps on both are quite clear. I hit send. I listened to the silence on the speakerphone. I knew the exact moment the message arrived by the sudden, sharp intake of her breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. I pictured her looking at her phone screen, watching herself, watching her own hand, her own face, as she performed the act that had started all of this. The video was grainy, silent, but it screamed her guilt. The silence stretched on. 10 seconds, 30, a full minute. There was no more yelling, no more accusations. I had taken away her ability to lie, to spin a story. I had confronted her with a truth so absolute, so undeniable, that it had shattered her reality. When she finally made a sound, it wasn't a word. It was a sob, a low, guttural, and utterly broken sound. It was the sound of a queen checkmated, of a performer whose mask had been ripped away in front of a full audience. "You won't," she choked out, her voice thick with tears. "You wouldn't dare make that public. It would destroy the family. It would destroy Mom's memory." She was reaching for her last shield, the one she had always used against me, the appeal to a sense of familial duty she herself had never possessed. A small, humorless smile touched my lips. She still didn't understand. She thought this was a street fight, a messy, emotional brawl. She couldn't comprehend that I had elevated it to a corporate execution. "You're right. Mel, I won't make it public," I said, and I could hear the flicker of hope in her breathing. I extinguished it with my next words. "I don't have to. The legal department is already doing it for me. This isn't about a family spat anymore. This is about a multi-million-dollar corporation protecting its intellectual property from a rival. You're not my sister in this equation. You're a hostile agent. They will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. Not to help me, but to make an example of you to Sterling Thorne. I don't need to lift a finger." Another long, heavy silence descended. It was different this time. It wasn't the silence of shock or anger. It was the dead, empty silence of absolute defeat. I could hear the faint hum of my computer, the distant siren wailing somewhere down in the city streets below. On the other end of the line, there was nothing, just the sound of a life imploding. Finally, her voice came, so quiet I could barely hear it. It was a mere whisper. All the fight, all the fire, all the arrogance gone. All that was left was a hollowed-out shell. "You won." I looked out my window at the city, at the life I had built for myself, stone by painful stone. I thought of the stolen apartment, the cracked telescope, the bitter taste of zolpidem on my tongue. I felt nothing, no triumph, no joy, just the quiet, final click of a ledger being balanced. "No, Mel," I said softly, my voice just as quiet as hers. "You lost, all on your own." I ended the call. My phone call with Melanie was the last domino. After that, the chain reaction was swift, impersonal, and absolute. The corporate machine I had set in motion moved with an efficiency that was both terrifying and deeply satisfying. Catherine Brandt from legal and Michael Shaw from security requested a meeting with me that afternoon. It was held in a sterile, glass-walled conference room 2 floors above my office. The air was cool. the water glasses were filled, and the mood was as serious as a federal audit. There were no personal questions, no inquiries about my relationship with the hostile agent. I was, for the purposes of this meeting, simply the executive who had flagged a security threat. I recounted the events in a calm, chronological narrative, stripped of all emotion. I detailed the initial contact, the execution of the NDA, the dissemination of the tracked file. I presented my case as if I were outlining a financial projection. All facts and figures, causes and effects. "Do you have the access logs and the signed NDA?" Catherine asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. "I've already emailed them to you," I said, "but I also have them here." I slid a sleek, silver USB drive across the polished table. It contained only 2 files. The first was the comprehensive PDF I had compiled, the email chain, the NDA, and the time-stamped IP logs. The second was the video from Luna's table. Michael Shaw, a man whose placid exterior did little to hide the fact that his previous job involved hunting spies, picked up the drive. "Is this everything?" "Ms. Weston." "It's everything you need," I replied. I didn't include the hospital report or the toxicology results. I didn't speak of poison or attempted harm. That was a separate, more personal violation. To introduce it here would be to muddy the waters with emotion, to make it about a family drama. The case I was building for them needed to be pristine, a clean and simple narrative of corporate crime. The video of the dinner was a calculated inclusion. It wasn't to prove an assault. It was to establish a clear, premeditated motive. It demonstrated that Melanie's interest in me, and by extension my company, was malicious from the outset. It provided context for the breach that followed, painting her not as a careless consultant, but as a bad actor with a clear agenda. I had given them the data. The data would speak for itself. They didn't need me to editorialize. The footage of a woman surreptitiously drugging a senior executive from a rival company, followed by logs showing that same woman accessing sensitive data from within that rival's headquarters, told a story more damning than any accusation I could ever level. The investigation became a silent, powerful force moving in the background of my life. I was CC'd on a few initial emails. Then the communications went dark as the case was escalated. 2 days later, I received a call from David, my lawyer. They picked her up. "Claire," he said, his voice low and even. "Police were waiting for her outside her apartment this morning. The company is pressing charges. For now, the official line is corporate tampering and breach of contract. They're holding her pending a bail hearing." I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. There was no elation, no surge of victory. It was simply the logical conclusion of a sequence of events I had initiated, an equation being solved. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," David said, and I could hear the caution in his tone. "You do nothing. You say nothing. You are the interim CFO of a major corporation. You are a victim of a crime. But more importantly, you are a material witness in a corporate legal action. Don't speak to the press. Don't post on social media. Don't engage with anyone who asks. Let silence do the work. The narrative is already set. Anything you add can only complicate it." His advice was sound. It was also exactly what I had intended to do. I went to work. I sat in my office on the 42nd floor and watched the city breathe below me. I analyzed market trends. I signed off on departmental budgets. I maintained a perfect, uninterrupted facade of normalcy. My colleagues knew something was happening. The whispers in the legal department were impossible to contain entirely, but no one approached me directly. I was a figure behind a wall of glass, both literally and figuratively. My composure was my armor. But the story had escaped the confines of our corporate tower. On the 3rd day after her arrest, the first article appeared online, on a local business news blog. PR consultant arrested in connection with corporate espionage probe. It was a short piece, scant on details, but it named Melanie, it named my company, it named Sterling Thorne. That small story was like a drop of blood in shark-infested waters. The mainstream financial press picked it up within hours. Suddenly, Melanie's face was on websites I read every morning. Journalists, with their relentless hunger for a salacious narrative, began to dig. They pulled her public records, her social media history, her list of former clients, and they started to uncover the rot beneath the polished surface. They found the bankruptcy filings from her failed real estate venture. They found a string of lawsuits from unpaid vendors. A picture began to emerge of a woman drowning in debt, desperate and reckless. My name was mentioned only in passing. As the executive tied to the case, I remained silent, a ghost in my own story. Inside, however, I was anything but silent. The nights were the hardest. The carefully constructed walls of my professional persona would crumble in the darkness of my apartment. I would find myself standing in my kitchen, staring at a wine glass, and the memory would rush back with sickening clarity. The way the light caught her hair, the practiced, easy smile on her face as she raised her glass. To sisters, the look in her eyes not of hatred, but of a chilling, predatory focus, a means to an end. My destruction was a line item on her personal balance sheet, a necessary expenditure to achieve a profit. That look is what kept me awake. It was a cold spike of ice in my gut that no amount of corporate victory could melt. This was what people didn't understand about revenge. They imagined it as a hot, passionate, bloody affair. My revenge was cold. It was sterile. It was paperwork and digital evidence. It didn't require a single raised voice or a single drop of blood. It only required the truth, amplified by a camera and a server log. I had dragged her out of the shadows of her manipulative, emotional world and into my world of unforgiving, documented reality. In her world, she could lie, charm, and cry her way out of consequences. In my world, the data was absolute. The camera does not care about your excuses. The IP log does not care about your tears. One evening, staring out my window at the million anonymous lights of the city, I thought about her, sitting in a holding cell. For her entire life, she had been the one watching, observing others for their weaknesses, their desires, their vulnerabilities. She was a master of surveillance in the analog, human sense. Now, she was on the other side of the lens. Her every move was documented by the state. Her past was being dissected by strangers on the internet. Her finances were being audited by forces she could not control. She was, for the first time in her life, the one being watched. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that she would finally understand what it feels like to have every breath, every action, scrutinized. She would finally understand what it feels like to be a specimen under a microscope, and that, more than any prison sentence, was the true consequence. The corporate investigation was a contained, controlled demolition. The public unraveling was in wildfire. It started with a leak. Somewhere a clerk in the prosecutor's office, a disgruntled cop, a source within Sterling Thorne looking to distance themselves from the scandal spoke to a journalist. The story that had been simmering on the financial pages exploded onto the front page of every major news outlet. The headline on my phone's news alert was a gut punch, even though I had been anticipating it. Tech executive poisoning scandal PR consultant Melanie Landon, under investigation for attempted assault on sister. They had the video, or at least, they knew what was on it. The article was a brutal, detailed account of the dinner at Luna's table. It described the contents of the toxicology report, naming the zolpidem. It recounted the story of the security guard, Marco, who was now being hailed as a hero, and it included a grainy, pixelated still frame from the CCTV footage. There was Melanie, leaning over the table, her face a mask of concentration, her hand holding the tiny, almost invisible vial over my wine glass. That image went viral in an hour. It was everywhere. It became a meme, a symbol of the ultimate betrayal. People who had no idea who we were, who didn't follow the stock market or the tech industry, were now weighing in. The court of public opinion was in session, and the evidence was irrefutable. The internet, with its hive-mind curiosity, quickly made the next connection. Online forums and social media platforms lit up. I watched from a clinical distance, an observer of my own life's demolition derby. Anonymous avatars became jurors, dissecting every aspect of our lives. Wait, Melanie Landon, is that Claire Weston's sister, the new CFO at Veridian? OMG, it is. I found their mom's old Facebook page. Family photos and everything. Poisoning your own sister for a bonus? That's a whole new level of psycho. The narrative was set in stone. Melanie was the jealous, homicidal monster. I was the unsuspecting, hardworking victim. My silence in the face of the growing media storm only fueled that perception. I was seen as stoic, dignified, and professional. I followed my lawyer's advice and said nothing. I didn't respond to the hundreds of emails flooding my inbox. I didn't answer the calls from unknown numbers. But I knew that in the corporate world, a complete vacuum could be just as damaging as a poorly worded statement. My professional network was watching. The board was watching. I had to send up a flare, a single, controlled signal that I was still the person they believed me to be: calm, logical, and in control. I chose my platform carefully, not the emotional chaos of Twitter or the curated fiction of Instagram. I chose LinkedIn, the sterile, professional arena where reputations are built and destroyed with careful, measured language. I didn't post an article or a statement. I simply updated my status with a single sentence, a quiet, philosophical observation that I knew would cut deeper than any angry denial. Truth has no PR team. The reaction was instantaneous. Within hours, the post had thousands of interactions. It was screenshotted and shared across every other platform. It was hailed as a masterclass in corporate communication. The epitome of grace under pressure, one industry analyst commented. Claire Weston proves that the best defense is a quiet, unshakable confidence in the facts, wrote another. In a world of loud, emotional reactions, my quiet, cryptic statement was a thunderclap. It framed me as a person who stood with the truth, while Melanie, the PR consultant, was a purveyor of lies. The professional consequences for Melanie were an avalanche. The brands she had worked with, the companies that had once valued her networking skills, now saw her as radioactive. One by one, they began to publicly sever ties, issuing press releases that were dripping with corporate self-preservation. In light of the recent disturbing allegations, Brande has terminated its relationship with Ms. Landon, effective immediately. We were shocked and saddened to learn of the investigation. Our company has a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior. An old acquaintance from college sent me a text message. Hey Claire, hope you're holding up. Insane news. Just so you know, Melanie's gone completely dark. Deleted her Instagram, her Twitter, everything. She was erasing herself, but the internet never forgets. The call I had been dreading finally came on a Friday afternoon. It was a reporter from a major national newspaper, a Pulitzer Prize winner known for her tenacity. I don't know how she got my direct line. Ms. Weston, Sarah Jenkins from The Times. I know you haven't been commenting, but I have to ask the question that's on everyone's mind. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, watching the silent ballet of traffic far below. I'm in a meeting, Ms. Jenkins. This will only take a moment, she pressed, her voice polite but unyielding. Is it true? Did your own sister try to poison you at that dinner? This was it. The moment, the entire narrative, my public persona, the final act of this tragedy, would be defined by my answer. I could have said, no comment. I could have hung up, but I had prepared for this. I had rehearsed the words. I knew that the final, most devastating blow was not one of anger, but one of pity. I let out a soft, weary sigh, a sound I calibrated to convey immense sadness and exhaustion. That's a family matter, I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper. It's incredibly painful. I just hope she gets the help she so clearly needs. I hung up the phone before she could respond. I had just handed her the headline of the year. The quote was perfect. It was magnanimous. It was compassionate. It was also utterly devastating. It did not confirm or deny, but it did something far more powerful. It framed Melanie not as a criminal, but as a sick, broken person to be pitied. By the next morning, my words were everywhere. Claire Weston's heartbreaking response. I just hope she gets help. I was lauded for my compassion, for my grace, for my refusal to kick my sister while she was down. I was canonized in the public eye as a saint of stoicism, and in doing so, I had stripped Melanie of her last shred of dignity. She was no longer a diabolical villain in a corporate thriller. She was a pathetic, mentally unstable creature, a charity case. People didn't hate her anymore. They pitied her. They shook their heads and felt sorry for the poor, crazy woman who had thrown her life away. And I realized, standing in my office, looking out at the city that was now mine, that this was the truest, cruelest form of revenge. The courts could give her a prison sentence, a punishment with a beginning and an end, but I had given her a life sentence. I had sentenced her to be an object of public pity. And pity is a poison that kills much more slowly and much more painfully than any courthouse ever could. The request came through her lawyer to mine, a single, final meeting. Her plea agreement was on the table, a grim document outlining years of her life to be signed away. But before she signed it, she wanted to see me. The location she requested was a piece of pure, pathetic theater Luna's table. David was vehemently against it. It's a circus. Claire, she's looking for a moment, a soundbite, something to feed the press. There is absolutely no legal advantage to this. It's a trap. I know, I said, looking out my office window, but it's not a legal trap. It's an emotional one, and I'm not going to fall into it, but I am going to go. He sighed, the sound of a man who knew he had lost the argument. Then I'm going with you. I'll sit at the next table. I don't want you alone with her for a second. I agreed. His presence wasn't for my protection. Not in a physical sense. It was to serve as a witness, a clear and present reminder that this was not a family reunion. This was a deposition. We walked into the restaurant on a Tuesday night. It was quiet, the midweek lull. The hostess, a young woman who didn't recognize me, led us towards the same corner booth. The lighting, which I had once found soft and forgiving, now seemed sickly and yellow, casting long, ugly shadows. David took a small two-top table a discreet distance away, his back to us but his attention palpable. She was already there. The woman sitting in the booth was a ghost of my sister. The expensive blonde hair was gone, replaced by her natural mousy brown, showing dark roots and a limp, unwashed texture. She wore a simple gray sweatshirt, a size too large, that hung on her diminished frame. Her face was pale and puffy, stripped of makeup, revealing dark, sleepless circles under her eyes. She looked up as I approached, and for a fleeting moment, I didn't see a monster. I saw a defeated, broken woman who looked terrifyingly like our mother in her final days. The thought was a flicker of ice in my veins, a weakness I couldn't afford. I slid into the booth opposite her, the plush leather side, just as it had before. I placed my hands on the table, palms down, a gesture of finality. I would not eat. I would not drink. I was here to close a file. She stared at me, her eyes re-dimmed and hollow. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with everything that had happened between my sitting here last and my sitting here now. You won, she finally whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp, all its musical charm gone. It was the voice of a smoker, of a crier. They have everything, the lawyers, the DA. They've laid it all out. It's over. You got everything you wanted. She looked at me, a desperate, pleading hope flickering in her dead eyes. I need you to do one thing for me. Claire, please, just tell the press you forgive me. Tell them you found it in your heart to forgive your sister. It's all I'm asking. The request was so quintessentially Melanie, even here, at the absolute end. Her primary concern was public relations. She wasn't asking for my actual forgiveness. She was asking me to perform it for an audience, to give her a single positive headline in the wreckage of her life. I looked at her, my expression unmoving. I felt a profound, echoing emptiness. The anger was gone. The hurt was a distant, historical fact. All that was left was this bleak, necessary conclusion. I don't need to win. Melanie, I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through her desperate plea. Winning was never the objective. I just needed the truth to come to light. That's all. Her face crumpled. My refusal to play her game, to give her that final, manipulative victory, was a blow she hadn't anticipated, but it was just a sleeping pill. Claire, she stammered, her hands trembling as she reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt. I wasn't trying to kill you. You know that, right? I just wanted to slow you down. Her hand emerged from her pocket. Clutched between her fingers was the tiny glass vial. It was empty now, but it was unmistakably the same one from the video, from my nightmares. With a shaking hand, she placed it on the table between us. It stood there, a tiny, transparent monument to our ruined lives, catching the jaundiced yellow light. It was just a sleeping pill, she repeated, her voice cracking, as if the object itself could somehow absolve her. I stared at the vial. I saw the whole story in that little piece of glass. The jealousy, the calculation, the moment she tipped her hand over my glass, the moment my life split into a before and an after. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back and stood up. Her eyes, wide and terrified, followed my every move. I looked down at her, then at the vial on the table. When you buy it at a pharmacy, it's a sleeping pill, I said, my voice cold and clear as the glass itself. When you pour it into someone else's drink without their knowledge, it's no longer a sleeping pill. It becomes a choice. Your choice. I turned my back on her. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing more to say. The case was closed. I walked away from the booth, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I nodded once to David, who was already rising from his chair, his face grim. As I walked towards the heavy glass doors of the entrance, I could feel her eyes on my back. The two detectives were waiting just outside, as David had arranged. They were in plain clothes, looking like any other patrons. Their presence a quiet, final punctuation mark on the evening. They saw me, and their expressions shifted from watchful waiting to professional purpose. As I passed the booth, my arm brushing against the high leather back, her voice came one last time, a desperate, broken whisper that was meant only for me. I just wanted your life. The confession was so simple, so pathetic, and so profoundly honest. It was the truth that had been hiding beneath all the layers of lies and manipulation. She didn't just want my money or my job. She wanted my existence. I stopped for a single, final moment, my back still to her. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her face. I spoke softly, to the ghost in the booth behind me. You got mine, I said, just not the part you wanted. Then I pushed open the door and walked out into the cool night air, leaving her behind with the empty vial, the yellow light, and the consequences of her choice. The heavy glass door swung shut behind me, cutting off the warm yellow light and the muffled sounds of the restaurant. I stepped out into the night, and a light, misty rain was falling, the kind that doesn't soak you immediately, but clings to your hair and clothes, blurring the edges of the city lights into a watercolor wash. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wet pavement and exhaust fumes, a welcome antidote to the stale, recycled air of the restaurant where my past had finally been put to rest. David was waiting by his car, a silent, supportive presence under the weak glow of a street lamp. He simply nodded, his expression conveying everything that didn't need to be said. I nodded back, a gesture of thanks, and walked to my own car, the soft click of my heels on the wet sidewalk the only sound. Inside my car, the silence was absolute. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, the drizzle tracing erratic paths down the windshield. I pulled out my phone, its screen a stark, bright rectangle in the darkness. My thumb moved with a mind of its own, navigating to the video file, the one I had secured with David, the one that had started this all. I didn't play it, I just looked at the thumbnail, a grainy, frozen moment in time. My sister, caught in the act, a phantom in the machine. For weeks, This file had felt like a weapon, a live grenade I held in my hand. It was a source of power, of leverage, of cold, righteous fury. Now, looking at it, I felt nothing but a profound and weary finality. It was no longer a weapon. It was just a record, an artifact from a life that was no longer mine. My fingers moved across the screen. I selected the file, not to delete it, but to move it. I sent it to a deep, encrypted archive in my personal cloud, a digital tomb for things that needed to be kept, but never looked at again. The system prompted me for a file name. I paused, then typed the only 2 words that felt right. Melanie Final. With a final tap, the file vanished from my phone's immediate memory, transferred and buried, a quiet, digital funeral. The next morning, the news broke. My phone buzzed with an alert from a major news outlet as I was making coffee. The headline was stark. Prosecutor considers additional charges in Weston case following new developments. The article likely detailed the events of last night, speculating on what the new developments were. It would be filled with anonymous sources, legal analysis, and more fuel for the public fire. I read the headline, and only the headline. I didn't click the link. I didn't need to read the story. I had written it. I simply powered my phone off, the screen going black, and set it down on the granite countertop. The silence that filled my apartment was peaceful. Later that day, as the afternoon light began to fade, I stood by the large plate glass window in my living room, the city sprawling out beneath me. The rain had stopped, and the sky was a bruised purple and gray. I saw my own reflection superimposed over the skyline, a pale, translucent figure against the concrete and steel. I looked into my own eyes in the reflection. The anger that had been a furnace inside me for weeks, that had fueled every calculated move, was gone. The hurt, an old familiar ache, had finally receded. In their place was a vast, quiet stillness, an equilibrium. The accounts had been reconciled, the books balanced. My mind drifted back to that first night, to the moment that had changed everything, to the young security guard, Marco, his face pale with alarm, leaning in to whisper the words that had armed me with the truth. I saw her pour something. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips, a private acknowledgement in the reflection. I looked at the determined, quiet woman staring back at me from the glass, and I spoke the final line of the report to myself, a whisper to the empty room. She poured, I recorded. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Claire's journey. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and if you'd like to support the channel further, hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.